Out of Order Podcast, Episode 6.
Welcome to the Out of Order Podcast, your window into the firearms community, exploring those shaping the future of our rights and protecting our lifestyle, laws, legal cases, activism, and self-defense in a candid and honest podcast for our brothers and sisters in arms. Here's your host, James Kalita.
Thank you for listening to Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast, Episode 6. Today's sponsor is Liberty Classroom, where you get the history and economics classes they didn't teach you in high school. So head over to the show notes page, check that out, and today's guest is Steve Bozich. Steve is the founder of beararms.com and armedandsafe.us. The other day, one of our New Jersey attorneys made a joke. He said, loopholes are liberty finding a way, and that's what Steve has done. Steve has helped individuals that want to finish their AR or 80% lowers find a way to complete them while fully complying with the ATF mandates.
Steve, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And so, Steve, you recently came up with a way to get around the ATF's prohibition on helping people build their own AR-15s. Want to tell us about that?
Sure. Well, first, just I guess in the spirit of being precise and exact, we're not getting around anything. I found a way to comply with the law to the letter in a way that would allow individuals to use the tools and equipment necessary to complete unfinished receivers, to include AR-15s, without having to go out and, get their own, jigs, their own routers, their own vices, et cetera, et cetera. And the way we do that is simply, I guess a little bit of background for those who aren't familiar with the history of 80% and ATF rulings on the matter. When 80%, these unfinished frames and receivers, these parts of firearms that are actually considered the firearm itself kind of first became a thing, what guys would do is they'd rent out machine shops after hours, and they'd have what's known as build parties. And that sounded like way too much fun for the ATF, which did not please them. And so they put the kibosh on that. They issued a series of rulings. The most recent one is 2015-1, which essentially states that entities that are engaged in the business, in this case, the machine shop, whose tools and equipment are used to manufacture firearms, need to have an FFL. And those firearms have to be manufactured in accordance with the Gun Control Act, which means they need to be serialized, registered, recorded on a A&D book, etc. Which for a lot of people defeats the purpose of an 80%. So I guess the other thing in terms of accuracy is it was only sort of recently. It's actually been cooking for a long time. I do have to give a shout out to Cody Wilson with Defense Distributed. He was kind of my muse, albeit an unwitting and possibly unwilling one. And it was his ghost gunner that really kind of set me down the road to doing what I'm doing now. I thought it was a great idea, but I recognized the number of limitations, not least of which was an economic one. And so I set about to approach kind of the same problem or approach the solution to the problem in a different way. As aforementioned, the term engaged in the business is the actual standard by which the ATF uses per the Gun Control Act to determine whether or not an entity, be it an individual, a corporation, or something in between, whether or not that entity requires an FFL to manufacture firearms, ammunition, to sell firearms, or in some cases to sell ammunition. And so understanding the definition of engaged in the business is paramount. So I looked it up, And as it applies to the manufacturer of firearms, the term engaged in the business is defined by Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 921, subsection A, paragraph 21, subparagraph A, as a person who devotes time, attention, and labor to manufacturing firearms as a regular course of trade or business with the principal objective of livelihood and profit, yada, yada, yada. So I guess you could say I had an epiphany. I put together an application, and I asked the IRS if an organization formed for the purpose of firearm education and safety could build classes as a 501c3 nonprofit. And after many months of waiting, they came back and they told me yes. And since we are a nonprofit, we can't meet the definition of being engaged in the business of anything. And so we can give these build classes on these 80%, using the tools and equipment under our control and dominion. And that's pretty much the punchline.
That is great. And so how long have you guys been running these classes now?
We have not given a single one yet. Actually, we are to a certain extent, new in that regard. We just got our determination letter from the IRS a couple months ago. We just started our fundraising campaign. We still need to buy the milling machines. I'm in the process of securing a facility, a storefront from where we can conduct the classes. And we're really right now just trying to raise awareness and funds, to get this off the ground.
Great. And so how did you get into firearms? Was this a lifelong thing, or was this something recent, or something in history?
I wish I could say it was lifelong. No, I'm originally from Boston, Massachusetts, which, if you're not familiar with the hub of the universe, they do have a long storied tradition when it comes to firearms. But unfortunately, it is guns are bad, and don't touch them, don't own them, don't shoot them, don't say the word gun. No, it wasn't until basic training that and my first time on the firing line, when I was enveloped by a cloud of gun smoke and instantly got addicted to the smell, that my my foray began into the gun world. And unfortunately, being an active duty soldier, unless you're in a specific MOS, a specific field, you don't shoot that much. So it was really when I got out of the military that I was able to kind of jumpstart everything and really became engrossed in the firearm world. I got out in 2010. In 2013, I'm a political refugee in North Carolina, but now I call it home. And in 2013, the laws regarding concealed carry and the lawful use of deadly force changed very profoundly. Big shout out to Grassroots North Carolina, by the way, for leading the way for that law change. And the change was so profound that there was really no longer a good reason not to have a concealed carry permit. Should have one. And so in that vein, I decided to become a concealed carry instructor. And that is really when I started, kind of delving into the law and, doing a deep dive and really learning the ins and outs, not just of state law, but federal as well. And then again, as aforementioned, I stumbled across Cody's efforts with Defense Distributed, first the Liberator, and then, of course, the Ghost Gunner, which is a kind of a mini CNC machine, which will finish your 80% for you. And that's what really kind of kicked off my interest with the 80% market. Yeah,
that was a really innovative little machine. And then he had all that trouble with FedEx and everything.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And a lot of startups, a lot of entrepreneurs in this business have issues with, all sorts of, different services, be it financial, be it logistical. It's just one of the many obstacles that we have to overcome. Much less some of the legal ones that are out there. I am a firm believer that, if it weren't for the NFA and the GCA, all of the creative energy that gun enthusiasts pour into, developing SIG braces and bump stocks and, what have you, we'd already have colonized Mars.
Right.
But it's just what you have to do, to be successful. So.
Yeah. So, I had a question. There it went again. I need one of those mushrooms that they show on the Joe Rogan podcast. It helps with your memory.
Right.
Yeah. So, you and I know, why. Most gun owners know why you would want to start with an 80% lower. But for people who may not be part of the gun culture who are listening to this, what are some really moral, legitimate reasons that people would want to manufacture their own firearm as opposed to buying a serialized firearm and going from there?
Sure. I guess, at least for me and probably for you, the biggest thing is, and if you're not familiar with 80%, you might not be familiar with the entire framework that exists, for purchasing firearms, for making firearms, whatever the case may be. But the short of it is, when just a regular citizen goes into a gun shop, a store that has a federal firearms license to sell firearms, you do a background check. And the information that is submitted to the FBI to perform that background check is recorded on what's known as a Form 4473. That form also includes the information, the serial number, the type of firearm, etc. I don't want to sound conspiratorial or paranoid, but the fact is we're one Congress away from a new law that says that all FFLs have to turn in those 4473s, and we're going to have a registry, and then it just becomes a matter of just passing another law that says that this type of firearm is prohibited. If you built an 80%, that's not possible. So that, is certainly one big part of it. Another big part of it is, building it yourself, you learn a lot. You really do. Having built it yourself, you learn about the functionality of the firearm, which, I think makes you a better gun owner. It makes you a safer gun owner. Nobody has ever, in my opinion, ever become less safe by becoming more educated. And so having done it all yourself, I think you have a greater appreciation for how the firearm functions. And, as an aside, having an 80% gives you a lot of flexibility when it comes to customization as well. There's things that you can do with an 80%, before it's considered a firearm, that would be much more difficult if you were dealing with, a strict lower receiver, if we're just talking about AR-15s. So there's a variety of different reasons. There's, of course, keeping it off the books, so to speak. And earlier you mentioned it as an unserialized firearm, and there is no legal requirement that it be serialized. However, I recommend to folks that they do serialize it. The benefit to doing so is that if it is ever lost or stolen, you've got a private serial number that's not on a 4473, hanging out there. You know what it is,
right.
And you might be able to recover it. And of course, one of the other benefits is that if you happen to be carrying it and lawfully, and it attracts the attention of a law enforcement officer, and they're not familiar with the 80% market, then they might not be as taken aback if as long as they see some serial number on it. So. There's a variety of benefits to doing that as well, but it isn't required. And I do think that your two biggest benefits are, one, never having to worry about it ending up in a registry, and two, learning how it works. From bare bones to bang bang. So.
Great. And so, and again, a lot of people listening to the show are going to know all about firearms and why you would want a semi-automatic for self-defense. But for the people who've only been exposed to the mainstream media and think that a semi-automatic weapon with a detachable magazine is a weapon of death, would you share your thoughts on why someone would want this as a defensive weapon, or really any kind of weapon? Because despite what the media says, it has a lot of applications in sporting and hunting applications, but it's not really what the Second Amendment's about. But so, your thoughts?
Right, and to that vein, I almost dismiss the why would you want a semi-automatic for self-defense? Well, why wouldn't you? When it comes to self-defense, and this is, I guess, me speaking more so as a concealed carry instructor. Once you identify a target that poses an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm, your singular priority is to stop the threat. And there isn't, in fact, I will say that there is not a better action type out there than semi-automatic. I say that I'm thinking, well, maybe a full auto, but you have accuracy issues when it comes to that. So, no, somebody well trained with a semi-automatic, be it a handgun, be it a rifle, will be in a superior position to defend themselves. And it's as simple as that. But as you also mentioned, the Second Amendment has nothing to do with hunting, or sports or anything like that. The fact of the matter is, a free state, is one in which the power to govern is justly derived from the consent of the governed. And for consent to be legitimate, and thus the power to govern justly derived, that consent has to be extended freely, and it has to be capable of being withdrawn. And the Second Amendment is the means by which we retain the right to withdraw our consent, which is why a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state, and why the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Seems pretty simple to me. Apparently, there's a sizable percentage of the population that doesn't seem to understand that. But, one of the purposes of Armed and Safe, my 501c3 nonprofit, is education. And so, I have no problem doing my level best to go out and educate them, one way or the other.
Yeah. So, you've been an instructor now, I think, 8 years or 5 years?
I'm in my 5th year. Yeah, I'll have completed my 5th year in October, November of this year.
And so what are you finding? How are people's attitudes about firearms when they come to you? Are they enthusiastic about firearms ownership, or are they thinking that we need more restrictions on gun rights?
It's a mixed bag. I think nowadays they're more enthusiastic. I think that I had a greater probability of kind of a mixed bag of students back when, you'd have, for lack of a better term, panics, and there'd either be some kind of legislation proposed or a mass shooting event that compelled kind of everybody to go get their concealed carry permit. So I've certainly had students that have expressed why do you need one of these, that kind of sentiment. But I can say I haven't had one recently. It doesn't mean that they don't have that sentiment per se. It just means that they haven't vocalized it. They haven't expressed it in class. But I'm sure it's out there nonetheless. But I absolutely do get a very wide variety of students. That said, I give the class. I'm in Moore County in North Carolina. We're located right on the backside of Fort Bragg. And so, there's a pool of students that I think you're gonna be more likely to get folks that are gonna be more enthusiastic when it comes to firearms versus not.
Oh, great. And how can folks find you, help you? You're starting this educational nonprofit here. How can they help you out?
So, well, the name of the nonprofit is Armed and Safe. Our website is www.armedandsafe, one word, .us. And don't go to .com. They're like concealed carry husband and wife out in Arizona. We're .us.
And I was like, that was available?
Yes, yeah. They've really expanded the number of domain extensions out there. And yeah, I mean, we're looking for, donations. Right now we're using, originally we were supposed to be using GoFundMe, but GoFundMe was not interested in working with us because guns.
Yep.
So we transitioned to a company called UCaring. So they do our servicing for us. Unfortunately, I just got a message from them recently. They are in the process of being bought out by GoFundMe. So my main area of focus right now is securing a new source to process donations. We are also not only are we just accepting donations, but we're also doing a raffle. I happen to also run a for-profit. It's an LLC. It is currently strictly a online retailer. I have ambitions to open a physical location in the near future. But that retailer specializes in the sale of 80%.
Excellent. Okay.
And my for-profit was generous enough to donate to Armed and Safe a build kit for a Glock 19. So we are raffling one of those off as well. $10 per chance. We're selling a total of 300 tickets, and we're going to do the drawing as soon as our 300th ticket is sold. So,
okay.
And those funds are going to go towards, getting those milling machines, setting up shop, and hogging chips. So
Excellent.
it goes towards a good cause.
Great. Now I've been asking all of my guests to recommend, if they have any recommendations for Second Amendment books or gun rights books or anything gun owners should be reading.
Oh, that's a good question.
I know I need to start warning people before I.
Yeah, I mean that would have been nice.
Yep.
In terms of books, yeah, I mean the Constitution,
All right.
the Federalist Papers, I mean it's all right there, man. A lot of the reading I do nowadays is online. I guess it's not just important to understand what it's supposed to be, but I think it's also important to understand what it is. So I would also, recommend people read the laws that we do have, and look and figure out for themselves kind of the disparity between what the vision was when the Constitution was originally framed and ratified, and what we have now. And,
yes. Yeah, and that's a lifetime endeavor there. I think it's something like 50,000 pages of laws and federal regulations on the books right now. And
it can be overwhelming.
yes,
it really can. And I mean, I look at those who have done their best to quote unquote hack the NFA, be it with your bump fire stocks or your SIG braces or your shock waves or whatever the case may be, or hack the GCA, like Cody with the Ghost Gunner. And I also look back and I think when these laws were originally passed, be it the NFA or the GCA, how did that happen? I wasn't around for that. I was around for the Hughes Amendment, but I really wasn't of close to the age of majority, so I didn't have much of a say in that. But yeah, and I look forward and I look at future generations, and I think they're going to look back at us and say, what did you do? What did you do to claw this back and bring us back towards, what should be, not what is. And I don't want them to look at me the way I look at earlier generations. So I'm going to do what I can to bring us back to what should be.
Great. That is. I'm glad you said that, because I look back at that period of history too, and I wonder if it was based on fear and racism, like we have to pass these laws to make sure those people don't get these guns,
Right.
If it was the media, like we have access to so much information now, and back then, they got a paragraph, the FBI needs to ban these guns so that gangsters stop killing people, and
and it's really interesting if you look at the history of gun control, because especially with the Gun Control Act, and a variety of the kind of auxiliary pieces of legislation that have kind of popped up around it, the focus has been on handguns, for the longest time.
Right.
And it wasn't until the late 80s that I like to call them gun nuts, because in reality they are nutty about guns. But your gun grabbers, decided to pivot, and they invented this term called assault weapon, and they focused their attention on that. And they had limited success. They were able to pass the assault weapon ban in '94. Of course, it only passed with a sunset provision, which ended up not being renewed, so it ended in 2004, and that's been the focus of their energies, since. And it really is a foot in the door. If you look at the standard that they used in '94 to define what an assault weapon is, and then you look at the standard that they used in, just recently in the legislation that is in the House, 5087, I believe. The definition is vastly different,
right.
And that's it. An assault weapon is effectively whatever Dianne Feinstein says it is, and if that's the standard by which we're going to determine whether or not somebody has the right to exercise a constitutional right, then that is incredibly dangerous. That is more dangerous than a fully automatic, short-barreled grenade launcher.
Right.
I think it's incumbent upon all of us who understand what liberty is, what it means, and what it means not to have it, to fight tooth and nail to stop that from happening. Because if we don't, the future is going to be a very dark place.
Agreed. Well, Steve, thank you for being on the show. Any parting words for our listeners?
You should have warned me. No, nothing. Just keep doing what you're doing. Get educated, and I guess always be armed and always be safe.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to episode 6 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. That was Steve Bozich, and again, you could find him over at armedandsafe.us or beararms.com. Also, check out the show notes page. We'll have links to those, a few others, plus the books that he talked about on the show. You can help him meet those fundraising goals to get this project off the ground. Now, you can always help out the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast show by going over and using the Amazon affiliate links we have on the page, or by becoming a Patreon donor. You'll find links and info over at outoforderjameskalita.com. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next time.